Hi, Nicole here from the GYST Method, and I am with
Kirby James, also from the GYST Method. Now, we shot a video on location the other day, and the subject of bias came up. And, you know, Nicole, you and I got talking about this, and there's just so much to say on this subject. We have been dying, waiting to go and bring you some more insights on it. Let's do more. So, how about some more?
How about some more? So the conversation that we had started rather impromptu the other day was brought about because of economic pressures. We're starting to see large multinationals constrict. And what we were looking at specifically was the importance of recognizing prediction bias. Now, what does that mean? In short, it means that you think your prediction is going to be correct, valid, it's the right thing that you see happening in the future, and therefore you base all of your decision making on your predictions. Problem with that, though, is
you may be biased.
We all have bias.
It was really interesting. I've been following lately Ray Dalio, and he was actually talking about this exact issue and how he got knotted up in prediction bias, and I'm paraphrasing, and it actually led him to almost go bankrupt the first time.
Sure. Until
he did something that I think you and I are a proponent of, which is, it's not to say that his ideas, his hunches were incorrect. It was that the bias was, you know, really getting into it, and he couldn't tell where his biases were, where the data was saying. Because, I mean, let's face it, Ray Dalio was one of the great, you know, hedge fund investors, and his ability to analyze and come to decisions was epic. But then bias, he realized, started to get into some of his work.
Yeah, so I think what's important to talk about right now, especially in light of what's starting to come out in the news, is that the leadership teams for organizations, yes, recognize that there may be some prediction bias present, but what they can actually do to mitigate that. And it doesn't mean don't make a decision, be afraid to make a decision because of this prediction bias. It's recognizing it and we want to talk about the end.
Absolutely. Now, in the world of Lean Sigma, in various engineering professions and the risk management professions, there are many, many, many practical, usable, fantastic tools. They've been around for decades. I was doing a speaking circuit with CFOs a couple of years ago, and this was actually the core of that conversation, was around, it's not the tools.
Right, yes.
The tools are just a tool.
By tools, you mean some of the analytical tools that are used to collect and look at data.
Yeah, something like an FMEA, which stands for Failure Mode Effect Analysis. It's a spectacular tool.
Right.
Unless and when bias sneaks its way in. Sort of like that one tomato or one grape in the bag, and the next thing you know, the whole bag's all funky.
Yeah.
Bias can actually have a similar effect on individual and group efforts to think things through.
So would you say an example of that would be, say, perhaps one of the tools that you're using to analyze an area of your business presents an outcome that you didn't expect, but yet you still behave and make decisions based on what you thought was going to happen as opposed to what the data is telling you?
Absolutely. And so in the decision course that we're working on, that's actually one of the big learnable and applicable components, is your ability to either detect yourself or to have a way of working with your colleagues where when they ask that kind of a question, it isn't immediately met with this kind of a response.
Defensive.
Yeah. Right. It's very defensive, either passive defensive or aggressive defensive. And all of a sudden people learn really quickly to shut up and not say that because they get that kind of a response. Bias, you know, you and I have taken lots of statistics courses, and one of the things that we're told as you study statistics is that bias is almost impossible to get rid of.
Oh, of course.
And we're not saying that there's a utopian world where there's no bias. What we're talking about is your ability to be open to the possibility that there is
another option.
Well, that there is bias.
Well, yes, that as well.
Right? Because to your point, you're going through even a reasonable decision process, and you get to the end and you're looking at it, it's like,
Yeah.
I know they said chicken or fish on the plane, but no, I actually am not open to the idea of fish. and what instantly comes when we can be confronted with our own biases is you can actually find yourself getting 2 and 3 steps down the line before you can even admit to yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And I think part of what we're hoping to drive home for everybody is, especially in this climate where economies are starting to shift and things are starting to move, to be a little what could be perceived as an uncertain shift. And if we're not careful about what we see to be the future, meaning worst case scenario, then what's going to happen is we're going to assume, okay, I'm pretty sure based on what's happened before that this is what's going to happen in the future. So I'm going to make decisions to prevent what happened then from happening ahead of time. When in fact, if you take a look at the information in front of you that's happening now and make smart decisions and try not to crystal ball, then you're more likely to have made a decision that's not actually going to push you further towards the edge than you may otherwise have.
Absolutely. And this is what we were talking about in the last episode. I'm going to use actually a comparison for you coming out of sports.
Perfect.
I was a hockey goalie who played at a reasonably high level for a period of time. And there's been a lot written about the training of hockey goalies because everything happens so fast. And we would watch the best of the best, and it seems like they could predict
where it's going
to go. And really what's going on, if you dive into the research that's underneath all of that, you've been exposed to a variety of scenarios so many times, and you recognize patterns. You don't know what's going to happen. Right? You really don't. And you're ready for almost anything. And when the most likely thing or even an unlikely thing happens, because you've prepared, then you appear to be more ready than others.
Right.
And this even goes into the training of pilots, the training of astronauts, the training of anybody and everybody who has to react to situations. They don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
But what they've developed is this preparatory mindset where they accept they don't know what's going to happen.
Of course.
As opposed to, oh, I know, I've seen this before, I'm sure what's going to happen. And then when, oops, that happens, you look like a fool.
Yeah.
Because you've been locked in to bias.
Yeah. And so I think in a business context then, I want to bring this back for just a second. And I'm checking my notes because this is how important this is. I think one point that we also want to make is that if you're too strongly attached to what you think an outcome is going to be, you're missing a ton of opportunity in front of you. And like I said before, you may actually be steering the train off the cliff unintentionally, where you think you're actually veering it away. So when it comes to things like, and we touched on this briefly the other day, like practical things you can do now to prepare for the future. Meaning, if you think that your revenue is most likely to dip down by X%, take a look at your business and see what you can do with who you have and what you have in place to adjust for that. What I would recommend, and correct me if you see something different, but in terms of risk management in a responsible way, and instead of looking at everything through the lens of fear, instead taking a look at everything through a lens of a shift, just a different way of doing things. Is it possible that if scenario A, B, C, D, or E happen, are we able to maintain things? Not only maintain, possibly grow, but can we keep what we have?
Yes.
Meaning, you're not going to dump divisions. You're not going to fire half of the employee workforce. You're not going to, just let go of 20 of your vendors. Like, what can you do to plan so that you remain stable? What can you do now?
Well, you hit on something that to me is actually core. is this idea of various scenarios, right? And you can get pretty crazy with this.
Yeah.
They're actually fabulous team building and practical exercises, which is to take scenarios and then play with one variable, maybe two variables.
Exactly.
And just see, well, okay, if the revenue from this line of business, deviated by X percent, and that you're able then to have a conversation about, and so what?
Yeah.
To me, though, that's, I think, a very common and a very useful exercise. For me, where it gets really interesting is breaking your teams into subgroups. Give them the same scenario and then give them the freedom to come up with solutions.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I think one area that some leadership teams get into danger is they forget to ask the people involved.
Right, and there's even a more subtle thing, and I know this from a lot of years of facilitating groups, is you don't hear a lot from the introverts. The powerful, extroverts tend to sway the day, especially if they're in a position of authority. And one of the consequences of this is that a lot of the creativity, a lot of the imagination that can come out gets stifled.
Absolutely.
You can actually architect the way these workshops go, and they don't have to be a day long. You could do this in an hour or two, where you actually challenge teams to make it mandatory that everybody get heard and everybody's idea be brought forward in a creative way. This is something that I just adore IDEO for.
Yes, absolutely.
Because this is core to their creative confidence approach.
It's built in.
Right. It's to extract the imagination and the creativity of people and basically make it mandatory that everybody's position get heard.
Yeah.
I've facilitated a lot of boards of directors through strategy sessions. And for me, this is always my favorite part of those multi-day workshops. Because inevitably what I see is you get groups of smart people, you give them scenarios, and then say, what would you do with this?
Yeah.
And actually separate them in different rooms.
Yeah.
Don't let them hear each other, see each other. And at the end of the day, what will come back is you're usually going to get 60, 70, maybe even more, where they're completely aligned.
Right.
And then what you get is this absolute constellation of weird and wonderful ideas. And for me, it's very, very high value activity for a business, because now there's two things that come from that. One, you know what everybody agrees on.
True.
We can stop talking about that now.
Yeah.
Put that over there. We believe that's probably pretty much core.
Right.
And what you do is you spend the rest of your valuable time, especially if you do it well, exploring these really interesting and creative ideas. And you may find that, in fact, you can unlock gems that otherwise would have been lost in other kinds of sessions.
Well, it's true, because everyone involved, and especially within reason because of time constraints, etc., but the deeper you go in the organization, and I've found especially when you involve in these types of sessions the individuals that have direct point of contact with your vendors, with your clients, with your customers, they will come to you with the most incredibly innovative, creative solutions.
Usually relatively simple.
Oh, 100%.
Because they're practical.
Yes, because they want to be able to do their job efficiently and quickly and to the best of their ability, because they want to serve that client to the best of their ability.
Right.
So it actually serves dual purpose. It provides and delights your clients and customers, and it makes the individuals happier and more productive because they're able to actually do their job. So one thing that I've always found important in organizations is to speak to the people, quote unquote, on the front lines.
Yeah.
They get the most up-to-date, of-the-minute information. They have incredible solutions. And even if they can't come with a full recommendation, they often have insights that kind of fill in the blanks for individuals that are far removed from that day-to-day experience.
And this brings me back, I want to circle back on one thing and touch on another. So going back to your point of predictive bias, one of the this is where I believe time with the people who actually do the work
Yes.
actually can overcome some of that predictive bias. Now, they have their own
Yes,
version,
of course.
right? They, them, and there's a lot of that
It's
that
different.
they know because, I've worked here for 25 years. I know what's going to happen. And there's both good and a challenge within that. Yet by seeking out these really different opinions that aren't part of that typical meeting, you can actually reduce the amount of bias that can be in there, number one. And number two, this is actually what the best organizations have been doing for decades.
Yeah.
Around the Toyota production system, around lean, because lean and all of that is all based on exactly this. It's what I love, having gone through lean and Six Sigma training. I always found Six Sigma to be very sort of once removed, academic, analytical, and it has value.
Absolutely.
But wow, if you really, really, really want to do something, get the people who do the work involved in lean out an operation. Do a Kaizen, do a 5S. Get these things actually done with the people who do them.
Yeah.
It's real, it's practical, it's doable. It's the kind of stuff that your dad and my dad, if they were watching this right now, would go, well, it's about time you said that.
Yeah,
because
it's true.
that's where the real stuff in life lives. It's not in some hypothetical boardroom scenario.
Yeah, so I think one thing as a recommendation would be is to actually start to look, and if we use the example of even something as simple as your automated CRM or what a lot of the frontline individuals in your organization use, from experience, let me tell you, a good portion of roadblocks and workaround and band-aid solutions are often found there because most organizations do not feel that putting an investment into streamlining the front end is of value. Let me tell you, the money that you will save, the frustration turnover and culture improvements that you'll be able to make just by going in and streamlining that will set you up for success long term.
Absolutely. That's actually a core idea in something referred to as DFSS,
Right.
which is designed for Six Sigma. A client that we've worked with, they recently launched a cloud version of a software application that is their core business. It took way longer than anticipated, and people on the front line were getting quite frustrated. Talk to the fellow who's leading that out, and it's going like a dream. Because they spent the time to actually process out and work with everybody to actually see what was actually most likely to happen and to talk to the people who were going to have to sell it, support it, operate it. And they spent time with customers and they worked out 96% of the bugs before it ever got released. And now what's interesting is they were Canada's market leader in their space, and they're actually getting a bigger share.
They made good decisions and they planned ahead.
Right, which was they got around the prediction bias that they realized they had that was entering into the plan, the strategy, and then the planning and the implementation and the build phase.
Yeah.
And they just said, no, we're not going to go there. Bring everybody in and let's be open to hearing whatever.
Perfect.
And they're really becoming a fantastic success story.
There you go. Another example of when you take the time to make good decisions, understand some of the factors or constraints that may be affecting those decisions, how you can actually stay resilient, move forward, and see the success on the other side.
And that's where I'd like to close off, and Nicole touched on it beautifully. The resilience of the people leading the efforts are everything. Their ability to remain focused on where they're going and be open to contrary inputs.
Yes.
And not respond to them passively or defensively. It's like to hear them, to respond to them, to acknowledge them, to actually show a robust mindset, a mentality, so that people don't just say, oh, you invited me to a meeting, but you don't actually want to hear me. God, where's the donuts and the coffee? Right? Because they know.
Yeah.
Really, really good companies, the leaders have learned to be resilient so that they can be open to having someone point out you have a bias and you don't see it. That's absolutely core to what we do.
Excellent. So the next time we will come back to you and dive a little bit deeper on this topic. In the meantime, I'm Nicole from the GYST Method.
And I'm Kirby from the GYST Method. Thanks so much for watching, and please reach out to us and let us know your